get started. Listen, thank you everybody for coming. I see a couple faces from yesterday, but many of you, I think this is your first time, the first presentation you're coming to, so I'll just do a really quick introduction and then we'll get going with Chris. I'm Glenn Haley with Employment Branding and Communications. Catherine Whiting is my partner on this project. About 3 years ago, I think they, the company started this Summit at Sites program where at a number of our major locations, such as Brno and Brisbane, worked with presenters who had submitted their presentations for Summit and were available then to present for associates during Summit. Summit's loss is our gain. And since then, the program's grown, and there was strong interest in doing it here at Raleigh. So this is our first year presenting in-person presentations. And so we're really happy to have everybody. We did 2 presentations yesterday. We're going to do 3 today. And we had really good turnout, and we expect to have more people come in for these. We have food if you guys are interested, and recordings of each of these presentations will be available on the Summit at Sites page on Mojo tomorrow. Yesterday's presentations we'll be linking to later this afternoon. And we also have asked each of the presenters to come up with a couple trivia questions, so if you guys pay attention, and Chris will ask you 2 questions at the end of his presentation based on content from his slides. If you answer the question correctly, you will get an official Red Hat Summit t-shirt. But if you don't do that, we are going to pass around an attendance sheet. If you can fill in your name and your shirt size and just a couple other pieces of information, we will actually be drawing names from those lists of everybody who came these 2 days, and we'll have 10 lucky winners receiving t-shirts, and we'll let you know about that later this week. So I will turn it over to Chris Myers. He actually came to us all the way from Durham today. Red Hat Durham office, which is right next to Bull Stadium, if you're not familiar. We acquired Ansible, which is an open source software automation. Yep. Well, I'll let Chris tell you all about it. His presentation topic is testing Ansible roles and projects. So let's give him a hand.
Hey everyone, I'm Chris Myers, as he introduced me. I'm a senior software engineer working on our Tower product, which is the enterprise offering pairing to the open source Ansible product. And Tower will soon be open source. I think it says this year on the website. We're working on that. Usually the first question we get. Start off with who's heard of Ansible? Show of hands. Who's used Ansible? Who has had a need for testing in Ansible? Okay, good. I got some people. I was at New York City giving this for Ansible Fest, and I think I asked there, it was a different sort of format, and I asked who's heard of Travis, and I had no hands raised. I was like, this is going to be rough. Talk us how to use Travis in your roles in testing. So, all right, we have some people with some need for testing. That's good. Hopefully I'll motivate the others who have been users of Ansible the need for testing with Ansible. Start off, if you haven't heard of Ansible, it sounds like most everybody has, but it's an automation engine that allows you to automate your IT infrastructure, cloud bring up, and configuration, and really anything IT that you need to do. It's super flexible. If you're writing shell scripts, check out Ansible. You can still use those shell scripts or more easily run them on remote SSH machines. So it helps with that connection management, as well as once you get deeper into the Ansible, how you can write, how you can use modules to do operations that are a little more predictable than shell scripts and maintainable. Okay, so I'm going to motivate the need for testing with Ansible by describing sort of the developer progression through the Ansible ecosystem. As I just mentioned, you start off using Ansible maybe to run your shell scripts remotely instead of SCPM up there and SSH executing them. As you explore more of Ansible, you start to peel back your shell scripts and use the modules that Ansible provides so that you get the idempotent, the advantage of the idempotency. That word's weird once you start changing its past tense or idempotent, meaning that if you run it once, if you run it a second time, it should put the system in the same state as running it the first time, and so on. So if you trying to think of something that's not idempotent. If you add a file to a directory, just a random file, each time that should be, and you run that again, you're going to get a different file every time. Versus an idempotent way of doing it, you would get the same file every time. Not the best example, and hopefully I can get a better one for the idempotent nature. Okay, so start to peel back your shell script, remove the variables from the shell script, use Ansible's way of managing variables, and use its modules as opposed to command line invocations of shell scripts. So an example of a simple Ansible playbook, we have the first line or the set of hosts you want to run against, which that's actually wrong. It should be hosts all or host local hosts, some set of hosts, and fill that in. Then you have the task that you want to perform. Usually give your task a name, that's just good documentation. And apt is the module that you're running, and Nginx is the package that you want to install in this case. So you have your playbook, you run your playbook against either your local machine, a VMware instance, or not necessarily a virtual instance, or a cloud instance that you spun up. That's usually the developer flow for Ansible. You run it and you see it doesn't work. Let's say it fails. Like, oh, what happened? Oh, this is a fresh machine. I forgot to update the cache. It doesn't know where the package Nginx is. Cool. I run it, it succeeds. I proceed and make a more complex playbook, adding more tasks. Eventually, you'll get to a point where you're using conditionals to maybe support an Ubuntu system as well as a Debian system. So if you want to only use apt to install Nginx if it's an Ubuntu system, if it's a Debian-based system, you want to use yum to install HTTPD. So right away you've created a branch condition in your playbook. So this is sort of foreshadowing to why you need testing. Anytime you have branches, you want to exercise those branches and make sure it still works. So you'll quickly come to this point if you're supporting multiple distributions. And you might feel this pain very early when you're running your playbook against these two virtual machines, ensuring that it still works for these two OSs that you support. Eventually, you'll get more advanced with Ansible. You use some of its fancier features, controlling whether a play fails or succeeds, and then pivoting on that later, adding more branch conditions to your playbook. And then eventually, you'll be creating your own modules, using roles on Galaxy, publishing roles to Galaxy, and ultimately interacting with others as they contribute to your role or your project, your set of playbooks. And again, anytime you bring in other people, you're going to want testing.
What is Galaxy?
Galaxy is what's the equivalent? It's equivalent to PyPy for Python. It's where people can submit their roles to and others can consume them. So roles are reusable components than Ansible. So maybe I have a Postgres role that installs Postgres and such. Okay, so let's say you're making a role, again, role reusable component within Ansible, and you want this role to support installing multiple versions of Postgres, in this case 8.4 and 9.4, and you want to support installing Postgres locally on the machine and on a remote machine. So these are the high-level feature requirements you want from your role. So actually implementing that support, you create a role that maybe has 3 variables: Postgres the version, allow URI for permissions to allow connections from the outside in if you're doing a remote install of Postgres, and then the connection type to pivot off of inside your playbook to make certain decisions. So if you're not familiar, on the left are the Jinja2. I sort of represent them as this would be invoking the variables inside of Ansible, the Jinja2 format. Yeah, the names, Ansible has a global namespace for its variables. So in this case, I'm prepending my roles with Postgres underscore to create sort of a namespace within Ansible. So if there was another role used in a project and it used a variable called version, it wouldn't collide because I've prepended the name of my role. Okay, so our configuration matrix, we're choosing values for our variables. In this case, we want to support a local install of Postgres. This is an example directory structure you can use to capture these configuration matrices. You have your role, create a test directory. Inside of there, a make file to invoke your various test cases, which are just your playbooks, and inventory file, just going to house both your variables and your hosts. So it's all packaged into one. Alternatively, you could create subdirectories with YAML variable files that you could include, but in this case, I'm just going to stuff them all into the inventory so that it lives close by the hosts that the variables are for. The second configuration matrix, we're testing that the socket configuration works for Postgres 9.1 and a remote configuration. So we have our high level requirements of what our product wants to support, our role in this case, and then this is the translation down to how we're going to continue to support and be assured that it works for those features. And here's an example of one of those inventory files, inventory remote in this case. Tower is a group within Ansible. This is an INI file with a little bit more to it. It's not strictly an INI file, but it looks a lot like one. Tower is a group in Ansible. I'm defining variables for that group. 3 variables you see on the left and the values on the right. So you have the same feedback cycle as you did developing a very simple playbook. You're going to edit your playbook and just run it against some host that is clean and see if it succeeds or not. Since Ansible is a declarative language, you can be pretty sure that it did what it said. You don't care how it does it, just that it does it. So the best way to test it is running it. There's not much sense in running a task with an Ansible and then verifying that it did what it said right afterwards. It said it did it, and then it did it. So this developer feedback cycle, you have the same thing. You're running it on the command line. In this case, you have your 3 permutations of the features you want to still support. So if you're editing your playbook and you're like, oh, I know this touches the remote Postgres install case. Okay, let me run that inventory file that tests that. So it's still that same flow. All right, I'm going to jump now to designing your roles to be testable. As I mentioned before, the first thing, this is a best practice, and this is agreed upon. I don't think anybody's getting pushback for this. Namespace your roles because you're in a global namespace. In this example, the role is named Redis. So we prepend all of its variables with Redis underscore. Come on in. Okay, another best practice is, or to make it testable, is don't use global variables in your role. So don't use variables outside of your role, because then you have a dependency on the sort of project that you're using, and that role can't be reused easily in another project. So in this example, if I have a role called Postgres, and it has a variable in it, Postgres host, I'd explicitly pass in the PG underscore host, which is my project variable. I would never implicitly reference, or I would never reference PG host in my Postgres role. Always pass it in. Same with the second example in there. If you have an app that you've created a role for and it requires a PG host, again, at a project level, you'll find this common host and you'll pass it into a role. Another example is if you have a role that depends on another role's variable. Don't implicitly access that role, explicitly pass it in. So here I run the egg role first. That's going to create the egg var within the Ansible variable sets. And then when I run chicken, that variable I want to explicitly pass into chicken. I don't want chicken to reference egg var inside of the code, because then I create that hard dependency between the two. This example playbook output from that run. You have the setup, which is the gathering facts. Doesn't matter much here. You have the first role invocation. Is that the chicken one first or the egg? Sorry, egg. Okay, that is the egg one. So it's echoing out the egg var, which is its value is this is a variable defined in egg, and then it runs the chicken one, the chicken roll, and it's printing out the egg content there. This is a variable defined in egg, so you see it working. A little bit harder dependency to deal with is a sort of a circular dependency within roles where, let's say the chicken egg contains a variable that you want to use in the egg role, but you don't want to run the chicken until after the egg. So you can use include vars to get at the chicken variables, bring those into the Ansible variable space, then run your egg roll and pass that variable in, and then run your chicken roll. A little side note, if any of you guys used, I think this is Ansible 2.3, maybe 2.4, that's added this include roll thing. You might not have seen this before. It's supposed to support just running roles and bringing in their variables, but it doesn't seem to be working that way currently. So there's always some different way to do it in Ansible. If something doesn't work, there's 10 ways to slice it up and do it differently. just an example of that running. We see that we loaded in our chicken variables first, called our egg, printed out that chicken variable, called the chicken, printed out the chicken variable. Okay, now I'm going to try to motivate the need for automated testing. Right now, we've talked about just building it so that you as a developer can get a good flow with testing your different configuration matrices. But the second you start adding in multiple distribution support, that's when it gets really hard, because then you have to bring up like 4 different potential VMs on your local machine, and then run what is it? We had 3 different permutations of the configuration matrices. So that's 4 times 3. That's 12 different things you have to run every time. So we're going to use containers to help us automate this feedback cycle, this feedback loop. So we want to stay on the command line as a developer. We don't want to have to rely on our Jenkins instance or some remote thing to test it for us. But we're going to get the best of both worlds by we're going to do it with containers. Because it's a fast feedback loop, we can bring up and down containers very quickly, restoring them to their pristine state, so we can be sure, so we can be confident that it's a clean system every time we run. We can add multiple hosts. Ansible, there's a lot of test cases for example, most of this work came out of working on the Ansible Tower playbook installer and just seeing the pains of supporting multiple distributions. And for example, we've recently added HA support to our product, and that requires us to stand on multiple different hosts of multiple different distributions. So it's really powerful with containers. You can have that same sort of system locally. And then finally, you can leverage open source and free infrastructure like Travis CI and still use these containers. It's a pattern. Note that we are abusing containers here. We aren't running just one service inside of them. We're treating them more like light VMs. I've created some Docker files that stuff back in the init system to Ubuntu and CentOS so that you can run your, it's very common in Ansible to, once you install something like Nginx, you want that service to start on boot or whatnot. You want to test those service restarts. So the init system really needs to be there. And most distros have pulled those out for their containers, so we put that back in. And then we put SSH on these containers so that Ansible is, I didn't mention this at the beginning, Ansible is agentless, meaning unlike unlike Chef or Puppet, you don't need a service running on the remote machine. Well, you do. That service is SSH, but it's pretty ubiquitous and available. So we put that back on so you get closer to the production environment you're running. However, we do have a pattern for connecting using, Docker connection in Ansible, so just using the socket connection versus SSH to containers. So SSH is there if you want to test that. If not, you can use the other connection method. So I've created a role to facilitate these container bring-ups and teardowns and host addings called provision_Docker. And with it comes the curated containers you can use, the bringing up and down, the expressing of what hosts and what container image you want to use to test against, and the various connection methods. And I'll go into how to use this. But first, some more on your directory structure layout. Let's say you have a role called IP tables. I always prepend mine with role dash so I can find it in my GitHub thing, but the role name is actually IP tables in this case. You have your classic task directory, your test directory. Your inventory is your configuration matrix. I only have one in this example. And main is that thing that's going to be exercising your playbook. The make file brings it all together, makes it easy if you start adding more tests. And then there's a symlink back a couple directories to point at the roles, so that in your testing directory, when you invoke IP tables, it will execute tasks main. All right, so this is what an inventory file commonly looks like in Ansible. A little late here, you might have seen that spread out before. We have a group called myTest, and we have 3 hosts within that group. To use provision Docker, you just add a variable to those hosts, and you express what container image you want to use. So this is going to bring up, once we run provision Docker, it's going to bring up 3 hosts, 2 Ubuntu's, and 1 CentOS. And it does so using setfact and setting the SSH host IP address. We'll get into that a little more later. This is the invocation of provision Docker. It takes just one one variable, which is the set of hosts that you want to actually bring up. So in this inventory file, you could potentially have more groups, more hosts, but we only want to bring up these 3 particular hosts, so we pass in that list. And then we run a playbook against those newly brought up hosts, the my test group, and just ping those hosts to ensure that it works. Okay, another inventory example. I want to highlight that you can use still your production level inventory. So these are like your inventory files that you traditionally use. The only modification required is specifying the image. So you could run these tests against your cloud hosts, or you can run them against this container by calling provision Docker. So here's a more full test example. We're bringing up those hosts using provision _ Docker. And then we're running our role under test. Our role is called ID tables against those newly brought up hosts. And then we're doing a integration test or a smoke test at the end to ensure that everything went okay. It's very simple. Hey, did it open up port 8080, and can we get to our service behind that port? All right, so that's role testing. Now, as far as project testing, so again, this was for our tower product, and we have the high availability set up. So this is what our directory ended up looking like, testing our various scenarios. Note, I just want to note the pairing here between an inventory file, which expresses your configuration matrix, and then your test file, which executes the particular test, the high level feature that you want to support. And then the make file that brings it all together. I have an all directive that just includes all my tests I'm doing, and you see just Ansible playbook invocations and maybe some extra bash variable that you want to pass everything, if you want to pass some extra flags into those. The real nice thing here is you can utilize make J2 or J whatever for parallelism, so you can test all of your configuration matrices in parallel, bringing up containers. Not totally true, because you're going to max out on the number of containers that your machine can run, and you'll get into weird problems with that. So keep it reasonable depending on the number of hosts. If anybody's played with Docker Swarm after this, I'd like to pick your brain. Maybe a way to fan out the stuff, fan out the container, so you're not running it just on your local machine. Okay, so a more advanced project inventory file. We still have the same image equals on the primary. That's the host we're going to bring up with provision Docker. So we're going to bring up one container, and then these are under all colon bars. That's our configuration matrix that we want to test. A lot up here on this screen. So test default is the entry point. We're going to first run the include default playbook, which is right below that. Note that it's still the same, execute the provision Docker role, pass in the hosts that we want to bring up, and then we do some preliminary setup for our testing. In this case, we needed sudo on these containers in order for our playbook to succeed. So there's our test bring up. So there's room for that pattern, right? Anytime you do any sort of testing, you usually have some initialization step, and that fits nicely into this model. And then jumping back up to test default, we're including our installer entry point. So that's our production, that's our playbook under test. So again, bring up the instance, set it up, and then run our production playbook. This is an example of a HA install. We have under here, we have hosts spanning multiple different groups. That's what I'm trying to highlight in this. Remote DB is a little bit of a special case here. It's not actually something for our production. This is something just for our test infrastructure bring up. We want to install a remote Postgres. This mimics maybe an RDS setup where you have a remote instance already. So we include, in this case, we're including multiple hosts using the plus operator to concatenate them into an array. So hosts from our primary, hosts from our secondary, and then that remote database, which we're going to use. The include statement for include remote DB just sets up Postgres on this remote system. Again, nothing really to do with our production, but it shows that we can bootstrap our testing instances with this pattern. And then finally, we some more tests bring up from that Postgres host. We want to read in its SSH host that it was given, as well as its port, so we can pass that to our production playbook below. And this is just, again, setting up the remote Postgres database, just highlighting that it's not part of our production offering, but it's needed for testing infrastructure. So the point I'm trying to get across is treat your infrastructure code as if it's production code. Put it in your CI/CD pipeline, write tests for it. Have an acceptance test at the end. Also do syntax and style checking. There's information out there on the internet for how to do that with Ansible. Check that your playbook's idempotent, meaning if you run it once, usually people run it once, then run it a second time, there should be no tasks that are changed because the first time you ran it, it did all the necessary steps. A little bit more on acceptance testing. If you run your playbook and it just completes without failure, that's a pretty good acceptance test right there. But you should probably have one just high-level smoke test at the end. In this example, once we've installed Postgres, we just want to connect to it. Is it alive? So recapping, I taught you how to lay out your test directory for testing your roles as well as your projects. Role best practices so that your roles are testable. How to represent your different configuration matrices in your directory structure. And then how to bring up hosts for you to run commands against using provision Docker. And then CI/CD, you could maybe imagine how this would fit into your CI/CD pipeline if you're already using containers to test. I have a separate talk from Ansible Fest that shows a path using Travis and Galaxy and GitHub to create a full integration and deliverance pipeline. But most people are using Jenkins, so it doesn't entirely apply. All right, that's it. Now we're going to have the question and answer time, and if you don't play, you can't get paid. So.
Hey, can you talk a little bit about Ansible Fest and what it is and what you guys did? You said it was recently?
Yeah, it was in New York.
Okay.
I've lost track on how many they're doing now. Traditionally, they've had Ansible Fest in New York and in San Francisco and in London, I think, sort of larger fest. Now we're doing, I don't know the marketing term, but mini fests as well, which are free to the public. And they're pretty good. They're packed. Anyway, Ansible Fest is Ansible's conference. And you'll hear from speakers that work on core. You'll be able to ask core maintainers questions and see the roadmap of what's upcoming. And then we've recently snuck Tower into there as well. People don't like to hear as much about the enterprise systems. But
Can you talk about Tower for a second?
yeah, Tower is
Don't know what it is.
yeah, Tower's our enterprise offering. It gives you a web-based UI for controlling Ansible and running Ansible. It gives you the role-based access control that you might want for multiple teams and integration with third-party inventory management, that sort of enterprise features.
Thank you. No, that's good. And is all of Ansible products, are they all open source or just certain ones?
Yep, just Ansible itself, which is called core. Everything you do on the command line, that's open source. Tower is working towards that this year.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Yep. Question?
And how does Power relate to Travis CI and Jenkins?
It could be used to do that. You'd be writing all the playbooks. There's not first level support like Jenkins has for like managing slaves and that sort of thing. The pattern would be more to write a playbook that brings up a cloud machine and then run your things against that cloud and kill it at the end or something. So it's up to you to do the pipelining and that sort of thing. But it could definitely be used for CI purposes.
Great.
Yes.
I work in a group where, we have some playbooks all over the place where, they're used for like doing provisioning of certain tests and setting up certain environments. And I really think it might be worth setting up an Ansible Tower instance to kind of manage a lot of this stuff. And I was trying to figure out like, how can like a person person get like a license for Ansible Tower for like internal Red Hat use? Because normally it's just done through the subscription management system, and you know you just get it. But
Okay.
I couldn't seem to figure out like if I want to get Ansible Tower, like how do I get a license key? Is it even possible?
Yeah. There is a form on the website that basically I think you fill out your email and they'll email you a key.
Yeah, and then I did that.
Okay, and you didn't get a response
I
yet?
got a key, but it's like a temporary key. Like I want,
Versus
I think
a
it's,
permanent.
yeah, I want just like a regular key that everybody else gets.
Right.
That's not like a thing that we're doing right now. Like I understand.
No, I mean, every time I've heard someone ask, it's always been a one-off, like, oh, just contact me and I'll get you it. And then I've kind of heard that it was a hard time getting it. So I don't want to send you down that same
Yeah,
road.
so I think I even went as far as like going through the normal sales process. And
Yeah.
Nobody ever, maybe because it's on my email address is Red Hat, but.
Right. So let me try it. I don't even know. I know I can generate keys, but I probably shouldn't do that. But
Yeah. Like I don't, and maybe there's just a need for like if there's just like I'm sure there's other groups that might need this. And
right. I wonder if they're not concentrating on that because we're going to be open sourcing soon. So if you concentrate on that flow, and then once we open source, then you'll be able to get it easily, right?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Depending on like yeah.
The supported, well-working version, right?
Yeah, like it's like Fedora versus RHEL, right?
Gotcha.
Depends on how they do it.
Okay.
If it's like they open source it and it's like Fedora, or it's like we're upstream and I want the more downstream.
Right.
It's like how do I get that one?
So I've heard that question a few times. Let me try and find a concrete answer, and I'll have a card for you, so that I get that message out.
That would be great.
Yeah, sorry. I might have to cut this short because I do want to get to the question and answer.
Okay.
And we have to get Allison set up for the next round, but I'm sure you guys can connect afterwards. So if you
Absolutely,
can-
I'll be here.
Yes,
Go with your trivia.
I can talk to you afterwards, and I'd love to copy their slides.
Yeah, no problem.
Those folks go on Mojo. So, yeah.
Okay. So you have an Ansible role. These are the question and answer times. Your chance to win big. You have a Postgres role that installs Postgres and creates a Postgres database. You have a variable that contains that database name. What would you call that variable? Got it.
Postgres DB name, Postgres _ DB name.
You got it. Driving it home. Okay, what's the name of the Ansible role that can help you bring up containers to run testing in the back? I think there's quick.
_Docker.
Yes. So I'm pimping my project. If this meets your need, let me know, contribute, feedback, all that good stuff.
Awesome.
Thank you so much,
Thank you so
Chris.
much.